Welcome to the podcast summary of Wilhelm Reich. Today's story is about Wilhelm Reich, one of those figures who's hard to summarize without immediately running into contradictions. He helped shape major ideas about character, repression, and the body in psychotherapy, pushed a radical mix of sex politics and Marxism, and then drifted into orgone energy, UFOs, and a prison sentence that ended with book burning under federal supervision. So this is a catch-up on a legacy that's part real influence, part cautionary tale, and still weirdly alive in culture. One of Reich's most durable ideas was that neurosis doesn't just live in thoughts or symptoms. It also shows up in the body. He argued that people build what he called character armor, these habitual patterns of posture, movement, breathing, and muscular tension that hold emotional defenses in place. That idea traveled far. It fed into later work on ego defenses, body psychotherapy, gestalt therapy, bioenergetic analysis, and primal therapy. Even people who reject almost everything from his later years still tend to admit that this early insight had real staying power. The trouble is that Reich's own methods became increasingly physical. He would press on patients' jaws, chests, backs, and thighs to break up muscular rigidity and recover supposedly repressed material. Some former patients described that as painful and abusive, which is an important part of the record here. The body-focused theory had influence, but the practice could turn coercive. Reich also tried to do something unusually ambitious for his time. He wanted to fuse psychoanalysis with Marxism. His basic argument was that sexual repression and economic oppression reinforce each other, and that psychology wasn't some private side issue. It had a place in revolutionary politics. After Vienna's July Revolt in 1927, when police killed 84 workers and injured more than 600, Reich opened 6 free sex counseling clinics for working-class patients. These sex pole clinics mixed psychoanalytic counseling with Marxist advice, contraception, and sex education. He advocated sexual permissiveness for unmarried people and adolescents, which was way outside the comfort zone for mainstream psychoanalysts, and also too much for communist officials. So even when he was trying to build a movement, he had a talent for alienating multiple camps at once. That pattern does come up again. At the center of Reich's psychology was a huge claim about sex. He believed orgastic potency. His phrase for the capacity for a complete and emotionally uninhibited orgasm was the foundation of mental health. For him, orgasm wasn't just mechanical intercourse. It meant a temporary loss of ego and a full bodily discharge of emotion. He treated that release as the antidote to neurosis, which is part of why he became such a symbolic figure for later sexual liberation movements. He was called things like the prophet of the better orgasm and the founder of a genital utopia, which tells you both how influential and how easy to parody he became. And critics had serious objections. This framework could become judgmental and coercive, especially toward women who didn't orgasm, because Reich tended to frame that as immaturity, neurosis, or emotional deadness. So even his most famous liberating idea had a controlling edge built into it. Then the story turned sharply. Reich took what had been a psychoanalytic idea about libido and transformed it into a supposed cosmic and biological force he called orgone energy. He said it could be seen in the sky, in living cells, in cancer tissue, and in sexually excited animals. He built orgone accumulators, basically box-like devices with a Faraday cage feel, and claimed they concentrated this energy. He first reported dramatic effects in mice with cancer, and later tested human patients, despite not having a U.S. medical license. Albert Einstein even tested one of the accumulators in 1941 and did observe a temperature difference, but he concluded it came from ordinary temperature gradients. Reich rejected that explanation and later published the exchange as the Einstein affair, which is a very Reich move. If Einstein disagrees, the argument is going in a book. By this point, Reich was becoming increasingly detached from criticism. After opposition to his Bion experiments in Norway, he accused other researchers of failing to recognize new forms of life and grew more isolated and suspicious. In the mid-1950s, he believed UFOs were attacking Earth with deadly orgone radiation, and he used devices called cloudbusters to fight the spacecraft and manipulate weather. At the same time, the FDA moved against his accumulators and the literature around them, calling the whole thing a fraud of the first magnitude. A 1954 injunction banned interstate shipment and ordered the devices, along with related publications, destroyed. After one of his associates violated that injunction, Reich was convicted of contempt in 1956 and sentenced to 2 years in prison. More than 6 tons of his books, journals, and papers were burned under court supervision, which still lands with a chill, even if you think the government had a legitimate case against medical fraud. That's one of the lasting tensions in this story. You can reject the science and still be unsettled by the image of the state destroying books. Reich's legacy is divided in a way that feels almost impossible to smooth out. His orgone theory is broadly dismissed as pseudoscience, and his later life reads like a case study in grandiosity, persecution, and psychological deterioration. Prison psychiatrists found him legally competent, but documented delusions of grandeur, persecution, and reference. His daughter later speculated that he may have had bipolar disorder, while other analysts described an emerging psychotic process. But his early work on character, resistance, and bodily defenses still matters in psychotherapy, and that influence didn't vanish just because the later chapters became so extreme. He also became a durable countercultural symbol. His books and inventions influenced writers like Saul Bellow, William Burroughs, Norman Mailer, and Ace Neal. And versions of the orgone machine kept popping up in films and music, from Woody Allen's Orgasmatron to Kate Bush's cloudbusting. More recent historians have also argued that his Norwegian microscopy and lab work deserve closer study, not because orgone was vindicated, but because flattening his whole career into one long pseudo-scientific punchline misses the complexity of what he was doing earlier on. And that's probably the clearest way to hold the whole picture together. Reich was neither a hidden genius crushed by the system, nor just a crank from page 1. He was an influential early thinker whose work veered into damaging, unscientific, and increasingly delusional territory. So if Reich comes up as a villain, a visionary, or a punchline, the honest answer is that he was somehow all three at different moments. And if nothing else, he's a reminder that big ideas can travel a very long way from where they started. Sometimes into the clinic, sometimes into culture, and sometimes straight into the weather. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.